Hey, hey, hey. Welcome to a world of laughter, learning, and entertainment. Greetings, explorers of knowledge. Join us as we embark on a quest to understand Battle of Gilgal Church. The Battle of Gilgal Church, June 15, 1864 was an action during the Atlantic Campaign in the American Civil War. The Union Army of William Tecumseh Sherman and the Confederate Army led by Joseph East. Johnston fought a series of battles between June 10 and 19 along a front stretching northeast from Lost Mountain to Pine Mountain to Brushy Mountain. At Gilgal Church, attacks by the divisions of John W. Geary and Daniel Butterfield from Joseph Hooker's XVII Corps were repulsed with about 700 casualties by Confederates from William J. Hardee's corps. That day, in a separate action, other Union troops overran a Confederate skirmish line, capturing about 300 men. Gilgal Church was part of a series of minor actions that included the Battle of Latimer's Farm on June. After the Battle of Dallas on May 28, Sherman moved northeast until he reached the Western and Atlantic Railroad at Acworth. On June 4, Johnston abandoned his defensive positions near Dallas and New Hope Church and withdrew to a new line of entrenchments. Sherman was reinforced by Francis Preston Blair Jr.'s XVII Corps, and on June 10 he resumed his offensive. Confederate Corps commander Leonidas Polk was killed by an artillery round on June 14 at Pine Mountain. That evening, Johnston withdrew from Pine Mountain and Sherman's forces followed, bringing on the clashes near Gilgal Church. Shortly after the Union attacks failed, Johnston pulled Hardee's corps back to a new line behind Mud Creek. At Latimer's Farm, Union troops from Oliver Otis Howard's IV Corps gained a foothold in the Confederate line. On June 19, Johnston's Army of Tennessee fell back to fresh defenses based on Kennesaw Mountain. Now, let's delve into the intricacies of Union Army and explore its various aspects. William T. Sherman directed parts of three armies drawn from the Military Division of the Mississippi in the Atlantic Campaign. On April 30, 1864, the Army of the Cumberland, commanded by George H. Thomas, numbered 73,000 troops and 130 guns. The Army of the Tennessee, led by James B. McPherson, counted 24,500 soldiers and 96 guns, and the Army of the Ohio, under John Schofield, fielded 11,362 infantry, 2,197 cavalry, and 28 guns. Sherman's forces were supported by 25,000 non-combatants, including railroad employees and repair crews, teamsters, medical staff, and black camp servants. Thomas' army included Howard's IV Corps, John M. Palmer's XIV Corps, Hooker's XX Corps, and three cavalry divisions led by Edward M. McCook, Kenneth Garrard, and Hugh Judson Kilpatrick. McPherson's army was made up of John O. Logan's XV Corps and Grenville M. Dodge's left wing of the XVII Corps. Blair's XVII Corps joined McPherson's army on June 8. Schofield's army consisted of his own XXII Corps and a cavalry division under George Stoneman. The IV and XX Corps each numbered 20,000 soldiers. The XIV Corps counted 22,000. The XV Corps had 11,500, and the XVI and XVII Corps each counted about 10,000 men. Welcome to the next segment, where we explore Confederate Army and its significance in our journey. Johnston's Army of Tennessee included two infantry corps led by William J. Hardee and John Bell Hood, and a cavalry corps under Joseph Wheeler. The army was soon joined by the corps of Leonidas Polk and the cavalry division of William Hicks Jackson from the Army of Mississippi. Hardee's corps consisted of the divisions of William B. Bate, Benjamin Fahrenheit, Cheatham, Patrick Cleburne, and William H. T. Walker. Hood's corps was made up of the divisions of Thomas Celsius, Hindman, Carter L. Stevenson, and Alexander P. Stewart. Hood's corps included the divisions of James Canty, Samuel Gibbs French, and William Wing Loring. On April 30, 1864, Johnston's Army of Tennessee reported 41,279 infantry 8,436 cavalry, and 3,227 artillerymen serving 144 guns. Battles and leaders calculated Johnston's reinforcements as follows: Hugh W. Mercer's Brigade 2,800 on May 2, Canty's Division 5,300 on May 7, Lawrence's Division 5,145 on May, French's Detachment 550 on May 12, Jackson's Cavalry 4,477 on May 17, French's Division 4,174 on May 19, William Andrew Quall's Brigade 2,200 on May 26, and a 643-man detachment of Jackson's cavalry on June 10. Other reinforcements came from two Georgia State regiments. 1,200 men returned from furlough, recruits, and returned deserters. There were about 8,000 non-combatants supporting the army, mostly men unfit for combat. Prepare yourself for an eye-opening discussion on operations in the upcoming portion of this video. Thumbwriter Prideholt map shows the Union advance from the Ito River to Jonesboro. Gilgal Church and Latimer's farm can be seen in the map's center. General-in-Chief of the Union Army Ulysses South. Grant instructed Sherman to move against Johnston's army, to break it up, and to get into the interior of the enemy's country as far as you can, inflicting all the damage you can against their war resources. Atlanta was a key Confederate railroad hub, supply point, and manufacturing center, so Sherman selected it as his geographic objective. The Atlanta campaign began with the Battle of Rocky Face Ridge on May 1864, when Sherman sent McPherson's army to envelop Johnston's west flank and the Confederate commander withdrew to Resaca. The Battle of Resaca was fought on May and ended when Johnston retreated. Meanwhile, Polk's corps began arriving in the theater. In the Battle of Adaspil on May 18, Johnston planned to strike at part of Sherman's forces. The attempt miscarried and the Confederate army fell back on the night of May 19 to a strong position at Altoona. Declining to attack the Confederate position frontally, Sherman attempted a wide sweep around Johnston's western flank with McPherson on the right, Thomas in the center, and Schofield on the left. This resulted in the battles of New Hope Church, Pickett's Mill, and Dallas in late May. Thumb lift up right. Alt black and white photo shows a frowning, bearded man with his arms crossed. He wears a dark military uniform. William T. Sherman blocked by Johnston's defenses. Sherman ordered McPherson's two corps to carefully pull back from their position on the right flank near Dallas during the night of May 31. This started a move to shift the Union forces eastward toward Acworth. On June 1, Logan's XVII Corps occupied the trenches of Hooker's XX Corps, and Hooker's men marched northeast. The same day at 5 p.m., Stoneman's cavalry reached Altoona, which was not defended. This meant that Sherman's railroad repair crews were finally able to work on the track from Kingston to the Ito River. On June 2, supported by Hooker, Schofield's corps moved north and east and gained a foothold across Altoona Creek before encountering a newly dug line of Confederate entrenchments. At the same time, two divisions of Palmer's corps filled in the gap between Schofield and the rest of Sherman's forces. On the morning of June 2, it began to rain, beginning an unusually wet month. When Hooker's corps and McCook's cavalry began extending the Union left flank on June 3, Johnston decided that he needed to abandon the defense lines around New Hope Church. On the night of June 4, the Confederate army pulled back into a new line of entrenchments that ran from Lost Mountain on the southwest to Brushy Mountain on the northeast. In the center, Johnston's troops held a salient at Pine Mountain. In 2 weeks of fighting around Dallas and New Hope Church, Sherman's forces suffered 4,500 casualties while Johnston's army lost 3,000. Confederate morale, which declined after the earlier retreats, was boosted by Johnston's successful defensive moves. Since the start of the campaign, Sherman's three armies sustained about 12,000 casualties out of a total of 100,000 men, while Johnston's army lost about 9,000 out of an estimated men. The problem for Johnston was that Sherman advanced about into Georgia and that the Union forces were relatively stronger than they were at Resaca. Also, Sherman was about to be reinforced by the XVII Corps and other units, while Johnston could only look for help from the Georgia militia. Let's zoom in on Pine Mountain and understand its implications. Thumbwriter Pritalt's sepia-tone photo shows a bearded man with his arms crossed. He wears a grey military uniform with 2 rows of buttons. Leonidas Polk Sherman rearranged his forces when it was clear that Johnston's army had withdrawn to a new line of defences. While Schofield's corps held its position, Thomas' army moved into position on its left. Meanwhile, McPherson's army moved behind both Schofield and Thomas to take a position on the railroad at Acworth. While on June 2, Schofield's corps marked Sherman's left flank, by June 7, Schofield was on Sherman's right flank, Thomas held the centre, and McPherson was on the left flank. The rain continued, the increasingly muddy roads making it difficult to bring up supplies by wagon. Therefore, it was timely for Sherman's force to be able to establish itself on its railroad supply line. On June 8, 2 divisions of Blair's XVII Corps reached Acworth with 9,000 veteran soldiers, after leaving 2,000 men to garrison Rome and 1,500 more to garrison Alatoona. One of Schofield's division commanders, Alvin Peterson Hovey, disgruntled at being passed over for promotion, resigned his command and went home. Consequently, the XVII Corps was consolidated into 2 divisions under Jacob Dolson Cox and Milo Smith Haskell, both competent generals. Thumbwriter Pritaltmap is labeled Operations Around Marietta from the Atlanta Campaign, Operations Around Marietta map from Jacob D. Cox's Atlanta. On June 6, Union repair crews began rebuilding the railroad bridge across the Ito River. On June 9, Railroad Construction and Repair Corps Chief William Weirman Wright assured Sherman that the bridge would be finished on June 12. With this information, Sherman ordered his forces to start a fresh advance on the morning of June 10. Johnston believed he was outnumbered 2-1 by Sherman. The true ratio was 3-2. At first, Johnston concentrated his strength on the left between Lost Mountain and Gilgal Church, but he shifted his strength to the right between Gilgal Church and Brushy Mountain when Sherman moved north to the railroad. On June 10, Sherman advanced his forces with Stoneman's cavalry covering the right, Garrard's horsemen on the left flank, and McCook's cavalry in the rear, watching the Ito crossings. McPherson's army marched down the main road, occupied Big Shanty, and came into contact with the Confederates holding Brushy Mountain. Blair's corps was on the left while Logan's and Dodge's corps were on the right. Thomas deployed his army into 3 columns with Palmer's corps on the left heading for Newton's Mills. Howard's corps in the center and Hooker's corps on the right marched toward Pine Mountain. Schofield's corps moved from Mount Olive Church toward Gilgal Church with Haskell's division on the left and Cox's on the right. Thumbwriter Pritaltcolor photo shows an historical marker on Pine Mountain. Historical marker on Pine Mountain. Each Union infantry column was headed by a swarm of skirmishers supported by a battery of rifled artillery. By late morning, the advancing Federals bumped into Confederate skirmishers near Pine Mountain. This feature was long and above the surrounding terrain, and was held by William B. Bates' division and 4 artillery batteries. Johnston's army deployed with Hood's corps on the right flank at Brushy Mountain and behind Noonday Creek, Hardee's corps on the left flank between Gilgal Church and Pine Mountain, and Polk's corps in the center. Wheeler's cavalry guarded the Confederate right flank and Jackson's cavalry the left flank, manning trenches as far south as Lost Mountain. Johnston wanted the Federals to attack Pine Mountain, but Thomas only ordered his troops to dig entrenchments opposite the height. Schofield's advance came to a halt north of Gilgal Church when it encountered a line of entrenchments. June 11 was the 9th consecutive day of rain, and the sodden condition of the ground made it difficult to get supplies to the Union troops. On that day, Wright's crews finished the Ito Bridge and a locomotive reached Sherman's headquarters at Big Shanty. At Sherman's request, the engineer took the locomotive almost to the skirmish line, tooting its whistle loudly to taunt the Confederates. It rained for 2 more days, but June 14 dawned sunny and clear. When Sherman made a personal reconnaissance of Pine Mountain about 11 am, he noticed a group of officers on its summit looking at the Federal positions with field glasses. Sherman asked Howard to make the group take cover, ordered a nearby battery to fire 3 salvos, and rode off. Howard passed the order to Captain Peter Simonson, who was artillery chief of David South, Stanley's division. Simonson issued the order to the 5th Independent Battery Indiana Light Artillery, which he recently commanded. In fact, the Confederates at the summit were Johnston, Hardee, Polk, and William South. Dilworth, the commander of Bates' Florida Brigade. Hardee wanted Johnston to observe the isolation of Bates' division and authorize its retreat from Pine Mountain. Polk wished to view the terrain since Johnston asked his corps to stretch to the right toward Brushy Mountain. After an artillery round streaked overhead, Dilworth urgently asked the generals to disperse, and they started to do this. A 2nd and 3rd shot arrived, and when Dilworth looked back, Polk was on the ground, dead. Polk was struck in the side by a round from a 3-inch ordnance rifle. It passed through his chest, ripping out his heart and mangling both arms. Dilworth insisted that Johnston and Hardee leave the summit, and they reluctantly did so because the shells by then were falling in clusters. Also on June 14, McPherson's army advanced on the opposing Confederate lines, with Mortimer Dormer Leggett's division of Blair's XVII Corps on the extreme left flank. In a dashing charge, the 30th Illinois Infantry Regiment of Manning Ferguson Forces Brigade captured a ridge that overlooked a line of outworks of Hood's corps. Outflanked, the Confederates withdrew behind Noonday Creek. Brace yourself for an enlightening exploration of Gilgal Church as we dive into its profound implications. Thumb right a bright alt black and white photo of a man with a thick beard and a receding hairline. He wears a dark military uniform with the 2 stars of a major general on the shoulder tabs. John W. Geary's division lost 519 men at Gilgal Church. Johnston ordered the withdrawal of Bates' division, and it was accomplished on the night of June. The senior division commander Loring assumed temporary command of Polk's corps. After discovering Pine Mountain was abandoned, Sherman believed that Johnston's entire army was retreating. He instructed McPherson to outflank Kennesaw Mountain and Schofield to seize Gilgal Church. He ordered Thomas to break through the Confederate center. When the IV and XIV Corps ran into tough opposition, Thomas ordered them to stop and employ their artillery. Nevertheless, these 2 corps moved forward and seized outworks before encountering the main defenses. Schofield's troops were enabled to capture an advanced line of Confederate entrenchments with small losses by first taking them under effective artillery fire. However, Hardee's main defenses at Gilgal Church remained intact. Stoneman's horsemen probed the Confederate lines near Lost Mountain. Thumb lift up right alt black and white photo shows a dark-haired, bearded man wearing a grey uniform with 3 stars on the collar. Patrick Cleburne Hooker's XX Corps also overran Confederate outworks in its front. However, the divisions of Geary and Butterfield were bloodily repulsed east of Gilgal Church. For several hours until dark, Geary's troops attempted to break through the Confederate main line but failed. They suffered losses of 82 killed, 432 wounded, and 5 missing. Butterfield's troops attacked Cleburne's division at Gilgal Church but were also stopped. On June, Butterfield's division sustained losses of killed and wounded. Among those units opposing the Union soldiers were Keyes' Arkansas Battery, Goldthwaite's Alabama Battery, and the 24th Texas Cavalry Regiment dismounted. One Texas captain described how his soldiers tore down the church, log by log, before the fighting commenced. One source put the casualties as 650 Union and 250 Confederate. The XX Corps suffered 5,000 casualties to date, more than any other corps in Sherman's host. Confederates began calling the XX Corps soldiers Hooker's Ironsides, and Hooker's men quickly adopted the name for themselves. The only Federal success on June 15 occurred on the eastern flank. McPherson moved William Harris' division of Logan's XV Corps to the left of Blair's corps, such that it overlapped the Confederate right flank. Charles Celsius. Walcutt's brigade charged across Noonday Creek and overran a line of Confederate rifle pits, taking 320 prisoners, mostly from the 40th Alabama Infantry Regiment, but some from the 31st Alabama. McPherson did not follow up this minor victory because his orders were only to threaten the Confederate right flank. That night, McPherson returned Harrow's division to its proper place in line south of Big Shanty. Ever the optimist, Sherman hoped that Johnston was about to retreat. On June 16, he ordered Thomas to push ahead in the center, but the Army of the Cumberland commander ignored Sherman. Instead, Thomas deployed his artillery to blast the Confederates out of their defenses. While on a reconnaissance, Captain Simonson was shot in the head and killed. Later in the day, soldiers from the 101st Ohio Infantry Regiment captured a Confederate sniper who admitted hitting Simonson after missing 3 times. Out on the Federal right flank, Schofield moved Haskell's division to the right where one of his brigades seized a hill. When artillery batteries were deployed on the hill, they were able to take the Confederate defenses at Gilgal Church under enfilade fire. Some of Hooker's batteries also established a crossfire, and Cleburne's line started getting shell from 3 directions. Johnston ordered Hardee's corps to pull back to a new line of entrenchments. During the withdrawal that night, a chance Union shell injured the leg of Brigade Commander Lucius East. Polk so badly that it had to be amputated. Polk was a nephew of the recently killed Corps commander. Let's now turn our attention to Latimer's farm and examine its role within the larger context. Thumb right, a bright black and white photo of a bearded man in a dark military uniform with the 2 stars of a major general on the shoulder tabs Oliver O. Howard. On the night of June, Hardee's corps pivoted on its right flank and swung its left flank back about in order to occupy a new set of entrenchments that Johnston prepared on the east bank of Mud Creek. On June 17, Hooker's and Schofield's corps advanced along the Sandtown Road, pressing back a covering force of Jackson's cavalry. Howard's corps moved forward about before encountering dug-in Confederates. Cox's division seized an island in Mud Creek with a hill that made a good artillery position. From the hill, Battery D, 1st Ohio Light Artillery silenced the opposing Confederate artillery after an hour-long bombardment. Meanwhile, Haskell's division crossed Mud Creek farther south, forcing Hardee to bend back his line to protect his left flank. Thumb left upright black and white photo of a bearded man in a military uniform with 2 rows of buttons out. H.T. Walker. On June 17, Thomas ordered Howard's IV Corps to attack the enemy with the proviso that he should not attack if the enemy's position was too strong. After pondering this directive, Howard directed Thomas J. Wood's division to attack across an open field at 10 am, with John Newton's division supporting his left and Stanley's division in reserve. Skirmishing started but no attack occurred, and just before 2 p.m. Wood's skirmishers reported that there were breastworks ahead. Wood finally ordered his main line to attack at 4 p.m., but nothing happened. Finally, at 6:30 p.m., Thomas ordered Howard to shell the woods. A half-hour of tremendous bombardment caused troops from Walker's Confederate division to retreat so that Wood's division occupied the position. Sherman observed the proceedings starting at 9:30 a.m., becoming more and more angry at the soldiers' apparent timidity. Actually, Wood's division had been mauled at the Battle of Pickett's Mill, and that probably explained why its advance was so tentative. The new defense line of Hardee's corps faced west while the defenses manned by Loring's corps faced north. Therefore, it was possible for Union artillery to enfilade both Walker's division on Hardee's right and French's division on Loring's left. Johnston recognized this defect and asked his engineering officer Stephen Pressman to prepare a new defense line. After a few days of clear weather, on June 18 it began to rain again, so that by the end of the day Mud and Noonday creeks swelled into small rivers. Early on June 18, Howard advanced the divisions of Wood and Newton so that their heavy skirmish line overran the outworks in front of them and captured 50 Confederates. On his own initiative, Brigade Commander Charles Garrison Harker secured the captured ground, and Howard directed Newton's entire division to support the move. The actions of Wood's and Newton's divisions against the salient held by French and Walker are known as the Battle of Latimer's Farm, and resulted in 200 Confederate casualties. The spotlight now falls on aftermath as we delve deeper into its details. Thumberite a bright black and white photo of a heavy-set, bearded man. He wears a dark military uniform with 2 rows of buttons and the 2 stars of a U.S. Major General on the shoulder. Tab George H. Thomas. On the night of June, Johnston's army fell back to another line of entrenchments based on Kennesaw Mountain. Johnston's infantry lines ran from Hood's corps on the right to Hardee's corps on the left, which was behind Noses Creek. Loring's corps defended the mountain in the center. The defensive position was probably stronger than anything seen so far by Sherman's forces. Hood's corps defended the area east of the railroad. Loring's divisions were from left to right: French, Edward Celsius, Walthall formerly County, and Winfield South, Featherston formerly Loring. Hardee's divisions were from left to right: Cheatham, Cleburne, Bate, and Walker. The next actions were the Battle of Cold's Farm on June 22 and the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain on June 27. Sherman dutifully telegraphed frequent reports to Union Army Chief of Staff Henry Halleck in Washington, District of Columbia. On the night of June 18, Sherman sent his first letter to General-in-Chief Ulysses South Grant since the campaign began. Sherman excused his slow progress by explaining that McPherson fumbled his opportunity to envelop Johnston's army at Resaca, but admitted that McPherson had done well since then. He also expressed disappointment with his cavalry commanders, calling Stoneman lazy and Garrett overly cautious. But Sherman reserved his sharpest criticism for Thomas, who he knew Grant did not like, and his army. He wrote, "My chief source of trouble is with the Army of the Cumberland, which is awful slow. A fresh furrow in a ploughed field will stop the whole column, and all begin to entrench. I have again and again tried to impress on Thomas that we must assail and not defend. We are on the offensive, and yet it seems the whole Army of the Cumberland is so habituated to be on the defensive that, from its commander down to the lowest private, I cannot get it out of their heads." Author Albert East. Castell insisted that Sherman's comment was unfair. As Cox explained in his history published 18 years later, starting with the Battle of New Hope Church May 25, the troops on both sides entrenched themselves as soon as they reached an advanced position. This was because the soldiers came to realize that 1 man in the trench fully equal to 3 or 4 in the assault. Once a Union formation reached a new position, a line of skirmishers was deployed. The officers marked out the most effective defense line, and each infantry company was responsible for constructing its own breastwork or trench. Trees were cut down for their logs, which were used to build breastworks. A ditch was dug in front, and the earth from the ditch was piled up in front of the logs to protect them from artillery fire. A headlog was placed on top, which provided the soldiers with a narrow firing slit. In front of the fortified line, a belt of abatis was created by cutting down trees and shrubs so that their branches pointed at any attackers. Cox estimated that it took 1 hour for veterans to construct such field fortifications. Confederate soldiers used similar methods, except that black slaves and the Georgia militia were employed to construct many of their entrenched lines. I'm here to provide you with the best information, so let me know what else you'd like to learn about.